Okay, boys, today we're doing something fun. We're going to build the perfect all-time NBA team. Now, we do first have to lay some ground rules. Number one, this is a team meant for the modern NBA. We're going to be playing by 2020 rules, so no hand checking, no sliding your feet under jump shooters, all that stuff, and that's very important. Number two, when we pick players from prior eras, we're going to assume that their play style will adjust somewhat to the modern NBA. So to use an example of a player that is not going to make my team, Steve Nash in 2008 averaged 4.7 3-point attempts per game, which was his career high. Now, based on the fact that he was a 43% shooter, you just naturally assume that if Nash played in 2020, he'd shoot twice the amount of threes. Number three, when we pick players based on their performance in a single year. So we do not care about longevity, which you would factor in when you're just ranking players. So I would like to emphasize, this is not an all-time ranking. So let's begin. And as we build the team, I'm gonna obviously talk about the team building philosophies because of course people are gonna disagree with the picks, and that's fine. We're just having fun here, but hopefully I can at least guide you through my thought process. So with the starting five, I'm taking Jordan, duh, and I'm taking LeBron, duh. These are the only two, I think, unanimous choices for a starting five, and two players that could easily fit together with no problem. As far as the year, I think the best Jordan was 1993 Jordan, and the best LeBron is 2013 LeBron. And actually, in this lineup, I want LeBron to start at power forward, which is what basically LeBron played in 2013 anyways. I've daydreamed a lot about what Jordan would be like in 2020, and at least my opinion is that if Jordan played in today's league, he'd be just as dominant, but in a slightly different way. He'd spend less time in the post, he'd shoot more threes, of course, but he'd also average more free throw attempts, and his free throw rates combined with his free throw percentage would really skyrocket his efficiency as a player. Let's talk about the center position. This is the position with the most amount of all-time greats, right? This is the most stacked position in NBA history. But in today's NBA, centers are asked to do things that they previously weren't asked to do. Centers nowadays have to guard a lot of pick and rolls. They have to occasionally switch onto perimeter players, which didn't happen that often in previous years. And offensively, a center that can shoot is really valuable, especially when I have 2013 LeBron, who was able to attempt like half his shots at the rim because he was playing alongside the center, Chris Bosh, who spaced the floor for him on offense. So with that being said, my pick to go with Jordan and LeBron at center is Kevin Garnett. I cannot overstate how dominant Kevin Garnett would be in today's NBA. You want him to blitz pick and rolls, he can do that. You want him to play traditional big man pick and roll defense, two hands at the rim, he can do that. You want him to switch onto perimeter players, he can do that. You want a guy that cares about playing defense? Kevin Garnett. Offensively, Garnett is a great mid-range shooter. In today's NBA, he'd practice shooting threes more often, and because Garnett is both a great mid-range shooter and a great free throw shooter, with just a little bit of practice, it's not hard to imagine him shooting threes at a consistent clip in today's league. Now, at small forward, there's a lot of options here. There's really like 3 or 4 players that you could put into this spot that would all be great. I ultimately went with Kevin Durant. You could pick 2014 Kevin Durant, his MVP season. You could pick Durant in his first 2 Golden State years. I ultimately went with 2016 Durant. This is his last year in OKC because I think this version of Durant was the best Durant defensively. Now, of course, with 2016 Durant, you're going to run into the issue where you get to the conference finals and he's going to choke. But since I got 93 Jordan, I'm not too worried about that. And then at point guard, this is where things get interesting because I already have Jordan and KD and KG and LeBron. I have all the ball handling and playmaking and scoring I could ever need. I don't really need a point guard. In fact, a point guard is kind of redundant at this point. So what do I need for the 5th player to go with these 4 superstars? I just need a player that sits in the corner and shoots threes and plays defense. So in other words, I need the most overqualified 3-and-D player of all time. And this is a very unorthodox pick. I'm gonna go with Joe Dumars, one of the greatest perimeter defenders of all time, consistently underrated by fans. Most people don't even remember that he was the 1989 Finals MVP. Now for this team, I want actually the 1993 version of Dumars. So this is the older Dumars, 29 years old, still first team All-NBA defense, but career high in points per game, 37% from three. Dumars, by the way, is a career 38% shooter from three, which is really darn good considering the era he played in. Like for most of the late 80s to the early 90s, the league average 3-point percentage was basically 32%. So if you actually adjust that to the modern NBA, where right now the league average 3-point percentage is like 35%, Dumars is basically what we think of today as a 40% 3-point shooter. Now, you might have already noticed that one of the team building philosophies I had was to not include any subpar defenders. Many offensive skill sets like off the dribble shooting and ISO creation become less important as the team becomes ridiculously good. But defense is different. Dominant defensive players don't redundantly overlap in the same way that dominant offensive players might. And so to put it in another way, when you can pick from every NBA player that ever lived, you can afford to not pick guys like Curry and Nash and Iverson and Barkley, because you can find guys who can fill their roles offensively on top of being top tier defenders. So with that being said, let's get into the bench unit. And by the way, I am just building a 10-man rotation here. So this is just 5 starters and then 5 bench players. Let's start with, again, the most difficult position, center. I'm gonna pick Hakeem Olajuwon. What would Olajuwon be like in today's league? Well, to use a current example, think about what Bam Adebayo has been doing this season for the Heat. Now make Bam Adebayo 3 times better at everything he does, give him the most unstoppable array of post moves of all time, and we have what Olajuwon would be in 2020. Again, this is not an all-time ranking. I'm not saying Olajuwon's the best or most dominant center of all time, although I actually think he has a case for that. But just for today's league, I think Olajuwon undeniably is the best selection here. If you're wondering why I have Olajuwon on the bench and Garnett in the starting lineup, it's actually because I think with the starting lineup with Jordan and especially that 2013 LeBron, I really want somebody who's a great shooter at center, and Kevin Garnett is a better shooter than Olajuwon. Now I actually have 3 small forwards on the rest of my bench unit. I have Scottie Pippen, Kawhi, and Larry Bird. I put small forward in quotation marks because Larry Bird in today's league would obviously play power forward. In fact, even on the 80s Celtics, he still played some power forward, and the Celtics would often make him defend power forwards because it was always just a better matchup for him. Bird is a player whose skill set clearly and easily translates into the modern NBA. And he's also a player that can still be really impactful even when he's surrounded by other great players, because he can do so much other than just scoring. Defensively, Bird is not as good on ball as his perimeter teammates. He would struggle against the super quick point guards in today's league like Lillard and Kemba, but you'd be hard pressed to find a better off-ball team defender than Larry Bird. This is a guy who mastered positioning and rotation and timing, all the stuff that is less sexy than on-ball defense, but in reality is actually more important in today's NBA. Now, because I got 93 Jordan in the starting lineup, I'll take 93 Pippen as well. You could argue 96 Pippen was a little bit better. One of the first YouTube videos I ever made was talking about how underrated Pippen was as a player. There's so many people out there who act like Jordan carried Pippen, that he wouldn't even be an all-star without Jordan. Whereas you saw in 1994, when Jordan left, how Pippen could be the best player on a 50-win team and be top 5 in MVP voting. Now, for Kawhi, I'll take 2016 Kawhi. Last year's Raptors Kawhi is better offensively, but 2016 Kawhi was better defensively. This is the year he won, was one of the years he won Defensive Player of the Year, and that defense is more important than having a Kawhi that's a little bit better on offense. And then for my 5th player, again, I don't need a point guard, right? Because I got Bird and Pippen and Kawhi and Olajuwon, so I'm not going to overthink this. I'll take Klay Thompson. Best Klay Thompson season, probably 2018, but in reality, you could pick from any of the past 5 Klay Thompson seasons because his numbers are remarkably consistent. So that's my 10-man rotation for the perfect modern NBA team. Now, as you'll notice, there's obviously a bias towards more recent players, and that's not an accident. It's because with more recent players, we can more easily imagine what they would be like in today's league. Is that fair to the guys who played in the 60s and 70s? No, but that's the reality. I will, in this last section of the video, talk about some players that almost made the teams, or talk about some players that people are probably wondering why I don't have them in my 10-man rotation. And we're gonna start with Kobe Bryant. I almost considered putting him in just so I wouldn't have Kobe fans rampaging my comments. Kobe and MJ is redundant, so if Kobe would make the team, he would obviously make the bench lineup in this team that I built. You could probably sub Kobe in place of Bird or Pippen, and I think you'd still have just as good a team. It comes down to a matter of personal preference. I wouldn't have a problem with anyone putting Kobe in their bench lineup. And then Magic Johnson. Why did I not have the greatest point guard of all time in my perfect NBA team? Again, because this is not an all-time ranking. Well, two reasons, mostly. Magic couldn't shoot, and Magic couldn't defend. Now, in today's NBA, you could definitely still build a championship contender around Magic Johnson, right? Somewhat akin to the way the Bucks built around Giannis, right? You just gotta surround him with a ton of shooters. But in the end, Magic's skill sets, the things that Magic was really good at, becomes less valuable and less important when you're surrounded with 4 other superstar teammates. And then lastly, Shaq. It kind of breaks my brain to even try to imagine Shaq in today's league. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to even imagine what he would be like. He'd be like Embiid on steroids, right? Minus the jump shots. Ultimately, though, there's 2 big weaknesses that Shaq has that Garnett and Olajuwon doesn't have, and that is Shaq was a poor free throw shooter, and he was bad defensively when he had to step outside the paint. And for those reasons, I'm out.